Good morning, colleagues, and a very warm welcome to today's Liasa online event. We are so happy to have you join us in this extremely cold morning, but I know after today's event, we'll be all feeling warm. It is always a pleasure to see familiar names pop up on the screen, and I would also like to extend a special welcome to those joining us for the first time. My name is Monday, and I will be guiding us through the opening of today's session. Before we begin, just a few quick announcements to help things run smoothly. All microphones have been muted and cameras have been turned off to minimize any disruptions. If you would like to speak or ask any question, please use the raise hand feature and we will assist you in unmuting. You are also more than welcome to share your thoughts or any question that you might have in the chat box at any time during the session. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be made available soon on our live and click content BSR events. Lastly, to ensure that we accurately allocate your continuing professional points, development points, we kindly ask you to rename yourself in the format that you can see on the screen: name, surname, and your designation, or just name and surname. With that, I will now hand over to Ms. Zosiphe Manyosha, who will introduce today's webinar and our esteemed speaker. Thank you once again for joining us and enjoy this session.
Thank you, Mr. Nzimande. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zosiphe Manyosha. I'm a librarian by profession. Mine is to just introduce the topic of today, the topic of our webinar. A recent study conducted by the Human Science Research Council titled "The Impact of Extreme Climate Events on Vulnerable Communities," a case study of Moyeshe and Goangoa in Limpopo, paints a sobering picture. The research shows that extreme climate events are not only becoming more frequent, but also more severe, intensifying their impact on communities. This makes it clear that there is an urgent need for effective disaster risk reduction strategies, better infrastructure, and stronger community resilience initiatives. While we don't have specific figures on how many libraries, museums, or galleries have been affected, we sure know that these cultural institutions face similar risks as any other public infrastructure when it comes to natural disasters. This same study reveals that over the past 2 years, South Africa alone has experienced 80 reports on disasters. 80 reported disasters affecting more than 22 million people and resulting in damages exceeding 113 billion of rands. This underscores the broader national impact now of extreme weather, not just on homes and businesses, but also on vital cultural and educational spaces, just like our libraries. Now, in response to these challenges that I've mentioned above, today's session, which is titled Building Resilient Libraries, Strategies for Crisis Management, managing both physical and digital collections. We will be covering several areas, which include how to manage both physical and digital collections after crisis, lessons learned from libraries that have gone through these experiences, and so many areas that we will hear as the message, as the meeting proceeds. I am privileged and honored to welcome our speaker of the day, a renowned expert in the field with a wealth of experience in crisis management within the library and cultural heritage sector, Mrs. Nikki Kroster. She has worked extensively in cultural heritage institution in helping the development and practical resilient strategies in the face of disaster. Now that just a brief introduction to her biography, to her wealthy biography. Nikki Kroster is a former LIASA president, reigned from 2018 to 2021. She is an LIS professional with more than 42 years of practice in public and academic libraries. She has expertise in leadership, governance, library systems, design thinking, and operations management. Mrs. Kroster currently occupies the role of Director in Information Systems and Resources at the University of Cape Town Libraries. As part of this professional portfolio, she oversees the UCT Academic Archives, the Rare Books and African Studies Library, and the Conservation Unit. She is the project lead for the salvage and recovery phases of the 2021 Cape Town Jaeger Library fire disaster management response. She has engaged widely on the matter of disaster management in libraries and archives, not just on national platforms, but on global platforms too. Now, over to you, Ms. Kroster. We are thrilled and honored to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zipe, and to Afanele as well. Thank you very much for the invitation to share the UCT Library's experiences with this matter. Your introduction is spot on. Global changes are taking place, and vulnerable communities whom libraries and archives serve are being greatly affected. So I'd like to share with you this morning my thoughts on the matter, our insights, and the experiences that we went through. So if I could please do a sound check and B, also checking that you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can see your presentation. We can hear.
Okay, I didn't hear that very well. Was that on my side or on your side?
Zipe, can you confirm if you can hear? But I can hear you, Miss Nikki. Yes.
Oh, brilliant. I can hear you as well now. Thank you very much.
Yes, so, yes. Yeah, I can hear as well.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to LIASA for this honor, for the invitation to speak to what is an ongoing challenge in our professional lives. It impacts greatly on us as LIS professionals and members of LIASA because we care deeply about our communities. As you may remember, over the years, many of the LIASA annual themes speak to the importance of people and of libraries. Libraries as hearts of the communities. And if libraries are burning or being flooded or experiencing any types of disasters, then certainly the heart of the community is being disrupted. When I speak today about libraries, it is a generic term for the GLAM sector. My focus is on libraries and archives, but less so on museums and on galleries, but all of us in the sector are affected in the same way. Title of my talk today is What a Disaster. Disaster responses in libraries and archives through the lens of the 2021 Jaeger fire, Jaeger Library and Reading Room fire. Right, so the agenda, I was asked to speak to 5 points. Now, these points are not discrete. You will find that they pop up throughout the conversation because they are interlinked, but there are key factors and those will be indicated as such. We live in South Africa, in the Western Cape, in Cape Town, and this is the southernmost point of the African continent. It is where the cold Atlantic Ocean and the warm Indian Ocean meets, about 200 kilometers from Cape Town itself. This then leads to great biodiversity and great climate changes, variations in climates, which Cape Townians like talking about every day. It has also resulted in what is known as the Cape Floral or Floristic Kingdom, which is one of 6 regions in the world. And in the Cape Floristic Kingdom, you will find 69% of the species are endemic to this area. It is also noted that these species are under threat from climate change. Cape Town is also part of the Cape Town National Park, which also includes Table Mountain. Table Mountain is one of the modern 7 wonders of nature, and as you can see, an incredibly beautiful site which always stirs my heart when I come home and I get to see the site. Nestled on one side of Table Mountain is the Historic University of Cape Town, one of the oldest, if not the oldest university in South Africa. And within UCT, the University of Cape Town, you have the University of Cape Town Libraries, and the Jagger Library and Reading Room was the first library. As you can see, a very beautiful space that was renovated in 2012 back to its 1920s or 1930s state. On the 18th of April 2021, the unthinkable happened, and a wildfire that started in Table Mountain crossed the mountain and moved to the University of Cape Town. And this is what happened. The absolute unthinkable happened, and the library caught fire, and the Jagger Library, which housed African studies material, unique African film collection, burnt. The entire floor burnt out. It was fully gutted. So the imperative and the question is, why must libraries prepare for disasters? Libraries are more than repositories of information. We are community hubs. We are heritage sites. We are vital support systems during times of normalcy and even during times of crisis. We are vulnerable to natural disasters. Books are made of biological materials, scripts, manuscripts, even AV material made of plastic. All of these are susceptible to fire and even to water and any other possible disasters such as earthquakes, being snowed under, for example, floods, other extreme weather events, seismic activity, as I mentioned before. Our region in this part of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, we're largely free of many of these natural disasters, but there can be no denying that the climate is changing. The world has gone hotter by several degrees, depending on with whom you speak. Right. Protecting our heritage, our collections, physical and digital, represent cultures, if not eons, of human thought. The opportunity for Africa to shine resides in our libraries and in our archives, and even our academic legacy. It is even more critical that we then protect this legacy. When they are lost, and in the Jagger fire, a very unique African film collection was irretrievably lost. It is a loss to humanity. We serve our community. We know that libraries are critical parts of communities, but during crises, libraries become safe havens, libraries become information points. They become they cater for recovery and for rebuilding. So we must be prepared so that we can provide that type of support in the event of a crisis. We have a duty of care in our LIS profession. We have a duty of care to our patrons. We have a duty of care to ensure that the manuscripts and the content in our care, and many of which are irreplaceable, are properly looked after. As you can see from the picture, the ruins of the Jagger Library still breaks our hearts. So disaster management, crisis management, there are various synonyms for this matter. For today, I will speak about disaster management. The disaster management cycle on the right side of our screen speaks to the various steps. While you will see various models of the disaster management site, they all have the same key elements, which is about preparation, about a response, about a recovery, and then about mitigation and analysis. And on the outside of the ring, you will see how the outside of the ring resonates with the mandate today around preparedness, around responses. How do we restore and reconstruct our collections after such an event? And then also, how do we train our staff? On the left-hand side, you will see an extract from the Disaster Management Act of 1950, number 57 of 2002. This act was amended in 2014 to take into account climate change. It has been noted that at present, two of the greatest threats to libraries, to the GLAM sector, are climate change and civil unrest. So, in terms of the Jagger fire, I will speak now about our response, but I want to acknowledge the role of the National Library of South Africa, which is a preservation and conservation center of IFLA, one of only 16 in the world. And together with the Endangered Archives Program, they launched, and the other partners you see, the Cultural Emergency Response, Whiting, and so on the screen. Last year in November, they held a very successful regional emergency response course to documentary heritage. The course program catered for people across the African continent, was very well attended, and the content certainly was of use from a practical as well as a strategic perspectives. What was the UCT Library's response to the crisis? The wires had burnt out of the library, so we couldn't get into the library. We set up a outside project office. We set up an inside command center once we were able to do that. We set up communication channels, assigned roles and responsibilities, set up a triage tent, ensured that occupational health and environmental safety factors were taken into account, because this was in the heart of COVID-19, the harsh lockdown that South Africa experienced. We sourced supplies from various places. We had to have access to finance, and we effected outreach. And all of those aspects speak to the pillars that I was asked to speak to today, around communication, around training, around assignment of responsibility, around the responses to the crisis. These are examples of how the staff worked. The staff were incredibly committed and worked under severe constraints. Here you can see that because we were in COVID-19, one had to wear a face mask, one had to socially distance, one toward 1.5 meters away from each other, the constant use of sanitation to ensure that the virus was not spread through this engagement. Staff worked under tremendously challenging circumstances, as you will see from this screen. While staff were attending to the salvage, the physical salvage of the building was taking place. And what you see in the middle of the screen and in parts of the screen are cranes taking away part of the ruined building, of the roof. The metal of the roof had warped so much from the heat of that fire. Once we were allowed inside, we found pockets of material. Please remember that this also impacted on the staff, because they were now working with what used to be their offices with familiar equipment. But at the same time, there were some good stories. For example, in the middle of the screen, we found that the map cabinets, although they had been affected by the fire, the contents were not affected. However, because of the firefighting, the contents were wet, and we had to mitigate that as well. We worked again under difficult conditions, and on the Thursday after the fire, by which time there was visible mold on the material in the fire site, in the burn site, we were allowed into the building, and we then started the salvage. I must say, at this point, talking about preparedness, we were underprepared. We didn't know what we were dealing with. We thought we would just take 200 boxes and that we would then finish this overnight, maybe 2 nights, with about 50 or so people. Keep that in mind. In a few slides, I will speak to that again. The conditions in the salvage site were challenging. Water was being pumped out. This was the water that the firefighters had to push into the top of the building in order to douse the fire. The water had now run into this area, the subterranean area of the building. The top floor was completely burnt out, but we had discovered an entire floor of material, albeit that it was thigh high in water. So the water was being pumped out, air was being pumped in, lighting was being put in, people had to wear masks, they had to distance themselves physically, and we were organized into groups. Staff were using their own cell phones for light. Um, we set up a particular system to ensure that the archive, when it was retrieved, the order of the archive would be maintained. Otherwise, it would have been irretrievably lost. We used human chains. As you can see on the top right-hand side, people were physically 1.5 meters apart. As part of the volunteer assessment, everyone had to undergo occupational health and safety training provided by the university, and people had to assure us that they could lift up to 25 kilograms, even though those crates did not weigh 25 kilograms necessarily. Because of the vulnerability of the books, we couldn't and did not fill the crates. Nevertheless, people had to have physical strength in order to maintain that. I also had colleagues who suffered from, who weren't able to work underground. And so, like me, suffer from claustrophobia, and they themselves were assigned other jobs. On this page, you will see examples of the use of the university's Twitter page in order to call for volunteers. You will see that we used various systems, methods, workflow systems in order to ensure safety and efficiency. And in the middle bottom block, you will see that there were many information boards. That was part of our communication plan. What you are seeing here is standard response, documented response to a crisis of this nature. Material was treated with a fungal solution. Material was triaged. That which was mostly dry was put in one place. That which was soaking wet and evident mold was saturated with an antifungal spray, tightly wrapped up in cling wrap, and put in into cold containers at minus 20 plus degrees. So, as I said earlier, we thought we could do this after 2 or so days with 200 people and so on. What happened was, after 17 days in a row, we completed the first extraction. We signed off the salvage phase formally at the end of May 2021. By that time, we had extracted 13,000 crates of material. Almost more than half of that had gone into cold storage at over minus 20 degrees Celsius. The material had been spread across 8 locations across the campus. We had more than 2,000 volunteers by that time. And on our plaza, on upper campus, we had 2 cold storage containers, 2 drying containers. All of this happened during the COVID lockdown. So, managing physical and digital collections after a crisis. As I've explained and as I've shared right now, of course, staff safety, human safety took place first. There was an assessment. We noted the mold on the materials. The mitigation for the mold I've shared before was antifungal spray. People were very careful in their handling of this material. We were wearing masks as a consequence of COVID-19, but if that had not been the case, protection equipment would have been issued in any case. The site had been secured by the university. We had undertaken the salvage. We had salvage partners at the university had provided as well. We stabilized the material. It was triaged into very wet, medium wet, sort of wet, mostly dry. The decontamination was taken care of, and already cleaning had started in the triage tent. The documentation was underway continuously, and we had partnered with various groups in the university. We had called on volunteers. We had an expert forum, a group of practicing conservators and people related to the area who had all offered their assistance. We organized it into groups. It is absolutely critical to be organized and to be on top of this, to apply organizational knowledge, operational management, to apply logistics, project management principles to all of these activities, which is what we did. I'm going to step over to the recovery for the sake of time. Again, talking about collection management, this is what we called in the middle the suit team. Material which had been affected by the fire, it needed to be cleaned, but it wasn't wet, it wasn't burnt in any way. On your left-hand side and on your right-hand side, you see the enormity of the task that was being faced and what the volunteers did. They went through every piece of paper and every page of book they could find in all of this in order to assess, look for mold, which was found, to find material that was more damp than than ought to be in the stacks of this nature, because all it would do would be to grow the mold. Talking about managing the collection, talking about preservation, the audiovisual archive was at the bottom of the Jagger Library, and consequently was about 3 shelves deep in water. That material was all salvaged. It was treated appropriately, and it was with a kind financial donations from an international source. That money was used to digitize the entire AV archive that was not in the cold storage containers, because that was material that needs serious attention. And also then at the same time, material that we found unscathed in a cold room in the university library. All of that material was digitized. Now that is a good problem to have, but there are attendant problems which I will come to later on. Of the 8,000 crates that we had extracted and put into cold storage, by September 2024, we had worked it down to 1 ton of material, because during that time it had been conserved. Some of the material had been conserved. But what we then did was we looked at the size of the problem. We had the equipment to deal with this material, but it was not commercial equipment. And we only have 1 conservator. And a decision was made that we would send 1 ton, our entire frozen goods collection, to Europe in order to be freeze dried in a process called lyophilization, which would freeze dry it, dry the material completely, take the water out of all the pages. However, it would not kill the mold. We had only put the mold in stasis by freezing it. And all it means that when the conditions were right, the mold would start up again. We also agreed to gamma radiation, because we knew the mold would then completely be killed off. However, the material would not be shelf ready. Last week, I and a group of colleagues undertook a business visit to Belgium to look at the frozen goods, to look at the progress, which we had been receiving reports of over the past 6 months. As you can see, as you can see on the screen, half of the material is dry. However, we know you might not be able to see it that well from the pictures on the screen, but the material, visible mold, is still present. So once the material is all dry, which we project to be a month or 2 months or so, it will go to Amsterdam to be gamma radiated. But the material will still not be shelf ready. As you know, when books get wet, they swell, they go out of shape. This material has been in frozen conditions for over 3 years. In fact, it's close to 4 years now. It needs, under different circumstances, it needs to be rebound. The picture on the right-hand side indicates with a type of glossy paper, that material might not be able to be fully recovered. We have to make some hard decisions, but one decision that was made last week was that the material will stay in Europe and it will be treated and corrected in Europe, so that when it comes back to South Africa, it will be shelf ready. Afulele, may I please ask if you could just give me a 5 minutes heads up or so? I'm moving as quickly as I can. Let me look at conservation, which is also part of materials and content management. The University of Cape Town has an excellent reputation, and consequently, we received offers to help globally. We also received some funding, as I mentioned before. With some of that money, we set up a conservation unit that now meets international standards. We've also instituted conservation practices, standards, and measures which held up to international scrutiny. And a colleague and I presented 2 years ago at the Performance Measurement and Standards International Conference on what it is that we did. As I've mentioned before, we have equipment that was purchased using international donations. We have 2 freeze dryers. Those freeze dryers cannot possibly compete with 1 ton, or cannot possibly assist us with the processing of 1 ton of material, and that is why we sent that material to Europe. It is very important as part of communication that we also convey our progress, not only to the community on the whole, all the stakeholders, but also to the donors. And here is an example of the documentation that I'm talking about, a mass treatment report of the outcome, some of the material that was fully recovered, restoration and digitization work. As you can see, approximately 3,000 units of pre-1925 Afrikaner pamphlets. Our focus is on how do we tell African stories. It's absolutely important that we retain the stewardship of this material. And as you can see on the far end on the right, our donors were quite delighted at the progress. I was also asked to talk about training, and at the same time, as I said before, all of these activities are interrelated. We'll try and separate them out for this conversation. Audiovisual, a type of collection, restoration. We did it through digital preservation, but at the same time of the fire, we realized that skills in this area are lower than we need, that can match our needs. And consequently, then UCT libraries partnering again with, in this instance, the Center for Film and Media Studies, and these are honest students and their lecturers, and two of our UCT libraries colleagues who have been speaking about an internship and who involved themselves in an internship. They assisted with metadata management. We applied an AV, an AI project to the AV. There's a report available on that. A whole lot of involvement where, in a way, we're growing the skills, we're passing on what we are knowing so that we ensure that there's a body of skilled people, or at least knowledgeable people in these areas. Around preservation, I'm not going to linger long here. I'm simply going to say, as I said before, that we had a good problem in that we were able to digitize all the audiovisual. The questions are now, who pays for long-term storage? Storage is expensive. How do we mount this AV in such a way that users can access it? All of that costs money. We are operating in a constrained environment, not only in the academy, but also throughout the library sector and frankly in our country as well. But as soon as the fire happened, people started pointing fingers and saying, well, hopefully it's all been digitized. Why didn't you digitize? And I refer everyone to a study by Higgs, amongst others, in 2019, who spoke about this very matter and who pointed out the factors relating to digitization and expected digitization, the cost, the funding, the infrastructure. In most archives and libraries, only a fraction of holdings are digitized. There's a dearth of skill around digitization, around digital preservation, even though we know that the academic libraries of our country are focusing on this at present. There's a shortage of training. That is why we're having this meeting. That is why we continue to have meetings. That is why I've lauded the National Library of South Africa for the workshop that was held last year. A lack of proper equipment. We're going back to money. I've spoken about a lack of infrastructure, but a lack of national policy as well. And this is something for LIASA to note. This is an example of a preserved architectural drawing from Herbert Baker. And actually what you're looking at is the architectural drawing of the Jagger Library. Just some observations, if I may. Number one is on the right-hand side. After we finished the extraction and the salvage, we found a folder that said Managing Preservation. This is part of the preparation, part of the toolkit, part what needs to be in a toolkit. At the time, talking about care for patrons, we have completed a business impact analysis. We continued with business continuity. We have a plan. We are in the recovery phase. We are sharing what we're learning, and I assure you we are learning continuously. We continue to focus on being resilient. We focus on the well-being of everyone who is involved in this matter, and we continue to express gratitude. One of the other pillars I was asked to talk about relates to stakeholder engagement. And so these are examples of what was done at UCT. It is not exhaustive. There's much more than we did. We have a website. If you go to lib.uct.ac.za, there is an option for the Jagger fire, and you will read about the Jagger fire. We've updated the status now to date. We have, as you can see, digitized almost 27,000 audiovisual activities. We have 70,000 surviving African studies content. We lost about half of it, and 3,723 government publications survived. You can see from the rest of the screen what it is that we lost. We lost about 100,000 items, but we have also to date recovered over 100,000 items, and we have many decades of work ahead of us. On the right-hand side, you can see a very professional and empathetic letter that our staff write to the donors, to the stakeholders, informing them with great sadness of the losses as we establish these. There was great consternation and a flood of outcry around what was lost. We couldn't establish that at the beginning, but as we continue, we ensure that we keep our donors and our related stakeholders in place, up to speed with ourselves. Around communication and engagement, just coming off the UCT Libraries website, as you can see, it's ibali.uct.ac.za. I invite you to look at this because this conversation, which takes place in a very short time, less than an hour, one time, is part of an enormous story around what it is that we did, what we've learned, how we responded, and what is going to happen. We talking about gratitude, it was critical that we acknowledge the human spirit. And this was a tribute to the volunteers, but also in essence to everyone who was involved in the Jagger Library. And for a long time, we had an outside display of the story of the Jagger fire, the story of the salvage that I briefly shared with you today. I invite you to go and read it. It is an electronic book on the UCT website. Again, Ibali, IBALI. If you go and look at ibali.uct.ac.za and you navigate around there, you will find a lot of content which is of great value to you. A lot of great value. Just another page, what happened was that so many people responded in various ways. This is also an example of stakeholder engagement. So a sculpture was made out of the twisted metal from the fire that was retrieved, salvaged from the fire, as well as burnt out books and fragments of books. About 2 years ago, ink was made from the burnt out residue of the Jagger fire, and a book was written that speaks about cultural heritage and stewardship and social justice relating to Africa. The book, in a digital version of the book, is also available. Many academics held conferences and discussions and talking points around the Jagger fire and the various aspects. Poems were written about it as well, and books were written about it as well. Staff patron and well-being, absolutely crucial that we looked after staff and we acknowledge the trauma. But I must say up front that in acknowledging the trauma, we're also moving towards normalcy. It is not a normal, might not be a normal that people who have not experienced a burnt out library might have, but it's our version of normalcy, and we celebrate. So amongst the things that we did at the time, we had a grief circle. Everybody gathered on the plaza and we spoke about and shared our memories of the Jagger Library. And there were many stories, there were many tears, there was much laughter, there was poetry, there was song. And we continue to do this in various ways. There were healing sessions, there were guided team sessions, formal sessions. There were also social sessions, and there continue to be social sections on a regular basis so that we touch in with how people are. We acknowledge people. I will come to that as well in a moment. And then again, continue on the well-being of all involved. On the screen, what you're seeing on your top left-hand side, which is approximately by 10 or 11 p.m., a very old stamp when we were still a physical library of the Jagger Library was salvaged, and this was handed over to the executive director of libraries at that time. On the top left-hand side, on the top right-hand side, round about the 1 o'clock, and the bottom right-hand side, round about 7 o'clock on the clock, you will see marshmallows and pizza and coffee. During the salvage, we fed people because human needs need to be taken care of. We had ablution facilities, we had water, we had groups of people moving in and out so that everybody got a chance to work under these dire conditions, but also then to breathe fresh air and to resuscitate themselves. People worked in shifts. And on the bottom right-hand side, you will see loyal DIASA supporters wearing the previous SA Library Week t-shirt who participated in the salvage. These are the acknowledgements that I spoke about. And in the second year, in the first anniversary of the Jagger fire, we celebrated it within the ruins of the Jagger Library. Yes, we took care, as you can see from the picture, it was shored up correctly. According to the engineers, it was quite safe to be in there. We got people from the UCT SA College of Music to come and perform a beautiful opera. I wish I could show you the video. So we continue to celebrate the human spirit. We celebrate with music and song and dance as we are wont to do as Africans, with poetry, with every talent that people bring, they bring to the fore, they make their contribution. We commemorate it every year, but we do not dwell only on the trauma and the loss. We also look at the opportunities that this has brought. While I do not wish that we had a Jaga fire, I must acknowledge that there are so many opportunities we would not have had if we hadn't had to deal with this crisis. I must assure you that I'm not advocating for these crises. I'm merely pointing out that the aftermath was not only negative. At UCT libraries, we are very firm about certain things. We tell our story, we own our story, we share our story. There have been so many requests from people wanting to criticize us, wanting to show us how we could have done better. We are open to that, but not at the expense of, of diminishing the efforts that have gone into this. And talking about preparedness, in a disaster of such nature, you will always have the naysayers who will tell you how things could be done better or worse. We protect our staff. We ask their permission if they want to engage with people who ask for them to do so. We empathized last week. My colleagues and I were in Belgium, as I mentioned before, and at the University of Leuven, who themselves had several crises over the span of their 600 years, but during the two world wars saw their libraries completely destroyed, saw collections completely destroyed. They showed us a picture of their burnt out library, which pretty much looks like a burnt out picture of the Jaga library that I showed you earlier. And what that did for me was it resonated with me that when we feel we are alone in these crises, we need to just hold in our hearts that we are not the people to whom only this has happened. And how can we help other people? Following the Leuven example, when the people at the University of Leuven saw the Jaga ruins, which looked so much like their ruins, they challenged each other and consequently raised a large donation in euros that UCT libraries benefited from, amongst others being able to digitize the AB collection. And so we need to, and we want to, and we do give back as often and as much as we possibly can. And I cannot stop emphasizing the importance of gratitude. And that is why you're seeing in the middle our acknowledgement page of our open air exhibition, which again, I repeat, is in an e-book for you to peruse. We acknowledge everyone who was involved. So the Jaga fire is not over. We are going to be in recovery for several more decades. In our investigative trip last year, we learned from especially the National Archive at Cologne that they've been at this for a decade or more, and they have a couple of million more pieces to recover. UCT Libraries doesn't have millions of pieces, but arguably you could say that if we have to relook at our archive and re-examine our archive, we certainly have decades still to go. As Winston Churchill said, this is not the end, nor is it the beginning, it is merely the end of the beginning. I would like to round off this talk with a call to action. I would like to ask this community to consider Liasa Preservation and Conservation Community of Practice. I was privileged as Liasa President to receive the AGM agreement to my proposal of a model of restructuring Liasa. And subsequent president, especially our current president, Charlie, has taken this forward with gusto. And I'm pleased to see these communities of practice spring up. I would really call on this community to start a Liasa Preservation and Conservation Community of Practice, because there are many libraries in our country which are not UCT libraries, do not have that brand name, will not necessarily have international responses that far, but are in the same boats as ourselves. We unskilled ourselves very fast. There are people and libraries, galleries, museums, archives who do not have that privilege. And so what is Liasa's role in this, further to our role as recipients at UCT libraries of these benefits that I have described previously? I thank you very much for your attention, and I am willing for us to have a conversation if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Nikki. We will now move into a short question and answer session. If you have any question or comment, please feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you. You're also welcome to share your questions in the chat box. But maybe before we take hands, I just have a quick one. I understand the urgent need for having training programs at our institutions. You have mentioned that during the recovery process, you identify this particular aspect of crisis management as one where there is lack of skilled professionals, even though it requires advanced skills, I assume. And I noticed that you have internship programs to assist with the recovery project, which likely involve recent graduate with minimum experience. Given this gap, do you think there is an urgent need for LIS schools in the country to revisit and update their curricula to better address this area? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. There is a need in general, and I understand that it's been underway for a few years now for an examination of the LIS criteria. The world moves faster than we do in the library and information sector in many instances. There is no doubt that the library and information services world and library information sciences, because research is absolutely crucial, has to play a leading role in attending to this problem of dearth of skills for academics, for especially neograduates, emerging professionals. But there has to be, and there continuously has been with LIASA as a professional body, there has to be a partnership between the library schools and between the LIASA so that practice and the profession meet each other in a sweet spot. And the outcome of that is a practical outcome where we have seasoned professionals who have the know-how, the strategic know-how, as well as the physical and operational know-how to attend to these crises and to prepare for what undoubtedly is simply the next crisis.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nikki. Let me check our webinar chat. Pindile Madiba is saying very much informative in the preservation of records and records management perspective. Thank you, Pindile Ndianga. This is heartwarming, Ms. Nikki. Very insightful presentation and talk. I'm not sure, colleagues, if there is any question, anyone that would like to ask anything or that have any comment, please raise your hand, or we can just close this session. Yes, Zosipe, you can come.
Oh, thank you so much, Ms. Nikki. But then my question is, I know you touched on it briefly, but then is there enough funding opportunities or resources available to support this disaster for recovering?
There's never going to be enough money. As you know, in our sector, in the LIS sector, we, especially in certain of our sub-groupings, there's never enough money. What I would like to touch on is that I spoke about partnerships. It's absolutely critical to partner with your organization, whatever it is. In our case, when we got onto campus the day after the fire, as soon as we were allowed onto the campus, the university's rapid response team had already set aside for us a specialist who could assist us with the disaster, someone who works with this as a commercial business. I'm not suggesting that that is the possibility in every instance, but you speak to your mother body, whatever that might be. Is it your municipality? Is it a particular grouping? Ask the question, what is our disaster response at present? Because this is not only about disasters for libraries, disasters for the GLAM sector is exactly the same as, in most cases, as a disaster for, I'm trying to think of something else that's not in the GLAM sector. the principles around disaster management, as shown in that disaster management cycle, are all the same. So the money will come from the mother body. Wherever your funding is coming from will have to come from that. That's number one. Number two is that as part of the outreach, as part of the communication, as part of the as part of the talking about what's happening, one has to appeal for donations. We went on the radio, we went on TV, colleagues of mine went on TV, we used social media, we wrote about it on our website, we sent out communiques in the university, and furthermore, statements were made in the newspapers. There was no doubt that we needed help, and help in various forms, whether it be physically, volunteering with your hands, or providing money. There was a fund that was set up, a Fund Me Now. And again, going in Belgium last year, what struck me forcibly was with every library that we went to, they had a Fund Me, they had an appeal, they had little bookmarks that had their fund numbers where people could make donations to. I think what is important is that, like in one's life, they always say one must have an emergency fund, which is equal to 3 months' salary. I know that isn't always possible. So take that to the libraries as well. Is it possible for us to have a disaster fund? If not, given the financial circumstances one might find oneself in, one will have to then find money. But start talking now to the bosses, to the decision makers, and say, did you know that this is what it costs UCT libraries? Did you know this is what they needed? If this happens to us, what is it that we are going to do? That is the question. If any message I need to leave today is to ask you, if the same thing happens to you, what do you need in order to respond, in order to get your business back up and running? The finer details of records management, how we cleaned this manuscript, how we cleaned that manuscript, I'm happy for us to share at another time with my colleagues, with my conservators, with the archivists, amongst others, to share the finer detail of that. But that cannot happen if there cannot be a response, and it must be a rapid response to the disaster. I hope that helps us, Sofia.
Yes. Thank you so much. You just answered my follow-up question. I was about to ask, what initiative can we take to stay prepared financial wise, but then you answered me. Thank you so much, Ms. Nikki.
Certainly. You know, the Americans largely call it a war chest. It's the same notion of preparedness.
Thank you, Ms. Nick, and thank you, Zosipho, for the question. And I see in the webinar chat, colleagues are very grateful to learn about disaster management and to be reminded that being prepared for unexpected is important. As we bring today's webinar to a close, I would like to say thank you, Zosipho, for introducing the session. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to you, Ms. Nikki Kroster, our esteemed guest and speaker. Thank you for always being willing to support LIASA's mission of advancing professional development in the library and information sector. Your experience and insight are highly valued in our profession, and we are truly honored to have such a knowledgeable and dedicated mind in our midst today. You have highlighted an incredibly important topics, and you have mentioned the parts that our communities, how libraries serve as vital part of our communities, especially in times of crisis. Disaster affects not only our communities, but also librarians and our libraries, and by extension, all of our LIASA members. I believe that we all have this session with, we all leave this session with valuable insight to reflect on and to share with our colleagues, and hopefully to implement in our institutions. Last but not least, thank you so much to all of you, the participant, for your presence and participation today. Your presence really makes this event or event like this very meaningful and impactful. We are truly happy and we appreciate your time and commitment until we meet on the following Liasa online event. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye.